Welcome to Photoshop Lesson 2.4 Smart Objects. Smart objects are layers that contain image data from raster or vector images like Photoshop or Illustrator files. Basically, smart objects preserve an image's source content with all its original characteristics, and that lets you perform non-destructive editing to the layer. A smart object could be considered like a container that you embed raster or vector image data into. And basically, you have 6 benefits from smart objects. First, you can perform non-destructive transforms. You can scale, rotate, skew, distort, perspective transform, or warp a layer without losing original image data or quality. That's because the transforms don't affect the original data. Second, you can work with vector data, such as vector artwork from Illustrator, that otherwise would be rasterized in Photoshop. I don't want to get into the difference between vector and raster images, but suffices to say, raster is basically consider that like a photo, and vector images are more like drawings. They're points, lines, and polygons used to like draw an image, so to speak. The third benefit is you can perform non-destructive filtering, and that means that you can edit filters applied to smart objects anytime. Fourth, you can edit one smart object and automatically update all its linked copies. So that means that you can make multiple copies of a single object, and every time you edit one of the copies, all the copies are updated. Fifth, you can apply a layer mask that's either linked or unlinked to the smart object layer. And sixth, you can try various designs with low resolution placeholder images that you later replace with final versions. Now keep in mind, you can't perform operations that alter pixel data, such as painting, dodging, burning, or cloning. You can't do that directly to a smart object layer unless it's first converted into a regular layer, which will be rasterized. To perform operations that alter pixel data, you can edit the contents of a smart object, clone a new layer above the smart object layer, edit duplicates of the smart object, or create a new layer. Keep in mind, when you transform a smart object that has a smart filter applied to it, Photoshop turns off the filter effects while the transform is being performed, and then the filter effects are applied again after the transform is complete. Okay, so let's check out how you create a smart object. Well, first, the easiest way, right now I have a background and some mushrooms. And the easiest way to make an object a smart object is to simply take a layer, and I'm on my mushroom layer right now, so I'm going to choose layer. I'm going to go up here to my drop down menus and choose layer, smart object, and convert to smart object. Now when I do that, notice here in my layers palette the little picture on my thumbnail that lets me know that I have converted this to a smart object. Now, I can also, in Bridge, I can choose File Place in Photoshop to import a file as a smart object into an open Photoshop document. So I could go to Bridge and do that. Also, to create embedded smart objects, I've got a couple of other items. I've got a tomato and some red chili peppers, and I want to have those brought in, so I can do that as well by simply going to my drop down menus, File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to open my tomato, and I'm going to click Place, and it will bring that object in as an embedded smart object. I'm going to hit enter to accept it as the size it is for right now. And then notice there's my little icon on my thumbnail that lets me know it's an embedded smart object. I can also choose File, Open as a smart object. And I'm going to open my peppers there. Open. Notice that it brought this in all by itself. Now I'm going to have to drag my peppers into my other file, and there they are, but still they have the Smart Object icon. I'm working in Creative Cloud, so I showed you that I can go to File, Open as a Smart Object, or Place Embedded, and I can open and bring an object into an open Photoshop file as an embedded Smart Object. In CS6, I can also choose File Place, and that will import the files as Smart Objects into an open Photoshop document as well. I also showed you how to just simply go to Layer. If I'm on a layer and I want to change it to a Smart Object, I go to Layer, Smart Object, Convert to Smart Object. And I also told you that in Bridge, I can go to Browse in Bridge, and then I can in Bridge choose File Place in Photoshop to import a file as a Smart Object. Now, while we're on the subject, an easy way to work with camera raw files is to open them as Smart Objects, and you can double click the Smart Object layer containing the raw file at any time to adjust the camera raw settings. In addition, I can select several layers and convert them to Smart Objects by simply selecting one layer, holding down my Shift, and selecting several layers, and then I can go to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to Smart Object to make them bundled into one Smart Object. Now, I don't want to do that right now, but that is an option for me. I can drag PDF or Adobe Illustrator layers or objects into a Photoshop document. I can also paste artwork from Illustrator into a Photoshop document and choose Smart Object in the Paste dialog box. Now I've got my mushrooms, tomatoes, and hot peppers all here, and it looks like a big mess. But because I've made them Smart Objects, I'm going to be able to transform their size without losing any of the quality of the photo. And that means not only can I make them smaller, so I'm going to start by choosing my peppers, and I want to transform them, so I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Scale, and I want to scale those down. So I'm going to hold my Shift key to keep them in perspective. And let's see. Nope, I think they need to be a little smaller. I'm going to drop them down some more. Okay, that looks about right. I'm going to hit enter to accept that. Now my peppers are a manageable size, and I'm probably going to end up rotating them as well. But remember, all of those things I can do, and I can do it because they're a Smart Object, and I don't hinder the quality of my image. So my peppers are going to look as good small like this, or if I blow them back up, and let's do that just to see. I'm going to scale them back, and look, they haven't lost any of their, quality going small or large. Next, I'm going to do the same thing with my tomato. So I'm going to go to my tomato layer, and I'm going to Edit, Transform, Scale, and I'm going to do the same thing there and drop that tomato down. I want it to be just a little bigger. Hit enter to accept, and now let me try my mushrooms. Scale those down. Okay, here we go with the mushrooms, and I should have gotten me some with a transparent background, but I didn't, so we're just going to work with it. Okay, so now my items there look a little more reasonable. I can see my background. We've talked about creating embedded Smart Objects. What about creating linked Smart Objects? Now, linked Smart Objects basically link the layer to the original image or source image file. So when I make changes to that original image or source image, it's going to update in this new file, or wherever my copy happens to be, wherever that linked object is. So I can do that a couple of ways. I can go to File, Place Linked. Well, first let me point out that in Edit, Preferences, General, I can have Always Create Smart Objects when placing checked, which mine is. Click OK, and then I can just File, Place, and it's going to be placed as a linked smart object automatically. I can also, let's say I have my pepperonis here and I want to drag them into this file, and I want them to be a linked smart object. Well, I would just drag them like usual, but I would hold the Alt key for Windows or the Option key for Macs and drag it over to this file, and it would become a linked object in this other file. Finally, and I'm going to go ahead and do this because I want to make my mushrooms a linked file. So with that layer selected, I can go to Layer, Smart Objects, Convert to Linked, and when I do, it's going to pop up and say that, it wants to save it. So I hit Save, and yes, I'm going to replace it. And then, as you can see right there, I have a link showing up, a link icon showing up to show that my mushrooms are a linked smart object now. I can update my linked smart object. So let's say that I open my mushrooms. I'm going to open them. Now in this case, I want to take them and cut them out of the background. So I want to select my mushrooms. Now I'm going to select the inverse because I really want the mushrooms and nothing else. And I'm going to delete that background, just that simple. And now I'm just going to Control S and save that. Now let's go over here to our file where we have our linked smart object and take a look at that. That's what we're talking about with a linked smart object. It was that simple for me to go to the mushroom file, do something to it, and it updates automatically over here. And that's all I have to do. And so I could have other people working on files for me in a busy office, or say you've got a massive project going on that takes a lot of hours of work. You could split it up between people, and the linked smart objects come in handy with things like that. Well, in this case, my file was already open, so when I made the changes here to my mushrooms, it was automatically, instantly reflected in my open file. However, when you open a Photoshop document containing out-of-sync linked smart objects, you can update them if you need to. And the way you do that is you simply right-click a linked smart object layer. So I'm just going to show you. Right-click, and I can just go to Update Modified Content. Update all modified content right there. I can also choose Layer, Smart Objects, and update all modified content right there. If it's out of sync, the linked smart objects are going to be highlighted in the layers panel for you. You can update all linked smart objects in the current Photoshop document by choosing Layer, Smart Objects, Update All Modified Content. Say I have a broken link. Somebody's come along and moved the mushroom file to another place. How do I deal with that? Well, the best way to deal with that is to go to and right click on that broken link and just relink to file. And then when you find it, you can go and find it and click on it and hit place, and it does. And there it is. I can also view my linked smart object properties. With a linked smart object layer selected, I just simply choose Window, Properties, and up pops my Properties panel. The path of the external source file for the linked smart object is available to me right here. The linked smart object size and positional coordinates, X and Y coordinates, are available. The width and height are also available. And directly from this panel, from the Properties panel, I can edit the contents of the external image file. And if necessary, Photoshop opens an external application that can handle the source image file. For example, Photoshop opens Adobe Illustrator if the external source image is a AI file. I can also embed the linked smart object within the current document. If I wish to embed, I can right-click on this linked smart object, and I can just simply click Embed Linked. I can also go to Layer, Smart Objects, Embed All Linked, and in the Properties panel, just like I showed you a minute ago, go back there, so I can convert it to linked. Now that I've saved my file with all my various layers, my embedded, my linked, okay, now what if I want to package my linked smart objects so that they're all saved to one folder on my computer? And when I package, a copy of the Photoshop document is also saved along with the source files in the folder. I simply go to File, Package, and I go to the folder I want it to be in, and in this case I want it to be in the Smart Objects, which it really is, and I just click OK, and it saves those in there. Now all those files, the Smart Object and the document itself, are saved in that folder, in the Smart Objects folder for me. Now keep in mind, you have to save a file before packaging the linked Smart Objects that it contains. And Photoshop works to locate linked files by looking in the last known absolute location, and it also looks in the same folder as the containing document. We've gone over embedding smart objects and linking smart objects, and while we were going through that, we showed you about converting an embedded smart object to a linked smart object. And simply you just select there's my linked, and I'm going to convert this to an embedded. So I layer, Smart Objects, I can convert to linked. If I want to convert an embedded smart object to a linked smart object. So I can say embed the linked object, and then I can go to one of these that are embedded and I can convert them to a link, Smart Objects, convert to linked, and it's going to ask me to save. Okay, save, tomato, do you want to replace it? Sure. Now let me just move some of my objects around a little bit, and then I also want to rotate my peppers a little bit. I think I want my mushrooms to be on top of my tomato, so I'm just going to move those, drag that layer above, and there we go. I like that a lot better. I can also filter the Layers panel by Smart Objects, and basically what I have to do in my Layers panel is select Smart Object from the filtering pop-up menu right here. So I drop this down and go to Smart Object and select Smart Object, and now I can click one of the following icons. I can either choose Filter for up-to-date linked smart objects, or Filter for out-of-sync linked smart objects, or Filter for missing linked smart objects, or Filter for embedded. Oh, I'm sorry, that's for out-of-date, and that's for missing, and these are for embedded smart objects. And I can also use this switch to turn off the filtering. And what if I filter for up-to-date locally linked smart objects? Well, if I do that, then there it's going to show me my tomato. I can also turn that off. Basically, this goes so I can show myself what's happening. Do I have any there are no layers that match that filter? So basically it's saying to you none are missing. Now, what about my missing linked smart objects? Do I have any that are missing? No. Do I have any embedded? Yes, I have two. My peppers and my mushrooms are embedded. And then, of course, as I said, you can turn that filtering off. Now, I can also duplicate an embedded smart object. Basically, in my layers panel, I select the smart object layer, and since I want an embedded one, I'm going to choose my mushrooms. If I want to create a duplicate smart object that is linked to the original, I choose Layer, New, Layer via Copy, and it makes me a mushroom copy. Or drag the smart object layer to the Create a New Layer icon down here at the bottom of the Layers palette. Edits you make to the original are going to affect the copy and vice versa. To create a duplicate smart object that isn't linked to the original, I'm going to choose my peppers, and I say Layer, Smart Objects, New Smart Object via Copy. Edits I make to the original are not going to affect the copy. So sometimes you may want to have it that way so that you can make changes that affect one and not another. This would work great if I'm working on some kind of ad or some kind of project for a client, and I want to give them layer comps options, and this would allow me to leave this the same and then make changes that would be updated in one layer comp, and then have the one copy that's not affected by changes to the original file, so that I could save and do layer comps that way. That would be helpful there. Now, how do I edit the contents of a smart object? When you edit a smart object, the source content is opened in either Photoshop, if the contents is raster or camera raw file, or the application that handles the placed format by default, for example, Adobe Illustrator or Adobe Acrobat. So when you save changes to the source content, the edits appear in all the linked instances of the smart object in the Photoshop document. Now, I select the smart object from the Layers panel, so I'm going to select my tomato because it's linked, and I'm going to choose Layer, Smart Objects, Edit Contents. Now, it's going to open that in Photoshop because that's where I had this file, but if it was in Illustrator, it would open in Illustrator, and so on and so forth. I can double click the Smart Objects thumbnail in the Layers panel, and in the Property panel I can click Edit Contents. Those are three different ways. So I could go and just double click and it opens it up, or I can go to my Properties panel and I can edit the contents, and it does the same thing. Then I would make the edits to the source content and then file save, and then it would update as I showed you earlier. What about replacing the contents of a smart object? You can replace the image data in one smart object or multiple linked instances. This feature lets you quickly update a visual design or replace low resolution placeholder images with final versions. So when you replace a smart object, any scaling, warping, or effects that you applied to the first smart object are maintained. I select the smart object, and I'm just going to select tomato, and I choose Layer, Smart Objects, Replace Content. And then it will, whatever I've done, I can replace that. I can replace my tomato with a better version of my tomato, a higher resolution image that would have taken more time to deal with in my document. And then I go to the file I want, and I click Place and click OK, and my new content is placed in the smart object. All the things I did to the tomato, all the changes I made, there they are. Now, what about converting an embedded or linked smart object to a layer? Converting a smart object to a regular layer rasterizes the content at the current size. So you only want to convert a smart object to a regular layer if you no longer need to edit the smart object data. And it's simple enough. Transforms, warps, and filters applied to the smart object are no longer editable after the smart object is rasterized. So I can't make changes anymore once I do this. But once I'm done and I want to convert this to a regular layer, I select that layer and I go to Layer, Smart Objects, Rasterize. And when I click it, it's going to change it to a regular layer. Now I can export the contents of an embedded smart object by simply choosing my smart object layer and choose Layer, Smart Objects, and Export. And then it's going to ask me to save, and I can export it as a smart object file. And do you want to replace it? I'm going to say no. Actually, I'm going to name it something different. Mushrooms 2. And save. And I've exported it. Photoshop exports the smart object in its original placed format. If the smart object was created from layers, it's exported in PSB, which it was. Now, we've done all these wonderful things, converting, exporting, replacing our contents, converting embedded to linked and linked to embedded, converting embedded or linked to a layer. We've filtered the layers panel. We've talked about duplicating an embedded smart object, editing the contents of a smart object, and we've packaged and viewed the linked smart object properties. One thing that we need to touch on, we can create and select multiple items, and this time I'm going to select these 3, and I can turn them into one smart object together. Notice what happens there. This has become, right there, a smart object all its own. The mushrooms and the peppers. I'm going to select my pepperoni and my mushrooms, and I'm going to convert them to one item together. Now, when I double click on that thumbnail, it opens that smart object, and you can see in the layers panel in that document, in my original document, there we are, it's moved it into one single layer together so that my mushrooms and my peppers are in one. And in fact, when I grab, notice it becomes one item together. So that's basically that smart objects for you. Fool around with it. Play with smart objects. They're a great way to make all the kinds of non-destructive edits that you need and still maintain the image quality that you desire. And have fun with your smart objects.